Lunch in the morning, lunch at night, lunch whenever you feel that it's right. There's no bad time for lunch.
Also, time isn't real.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode 7 of the Youngblood Monday Lunch. My name is RJ. I'm here with Graeme Gillis.
Help me.
Don't help him. We co-run Youngblood, the company of young playwrights at the Ensemble Studio Theater in New York City. And this is the 7th episode of our new play podcast. So we are bringing you not a new play. Here for the 7th episode, we are going to share with you, we were recently able to do an online Zoom Q&A between the 6 writers of the first 6 episodes of the Youngblood Monday Lunch and some of the supporters of the Ensemble Studio Theater who gave us questions and talked about what it was like putting together plays for podcast release for the first time in certainly the experience of the company, and I think the first time in the experience of these playwrights. So we're going to share that Q&A with you. The conversation went some really interesting places and some fun places and some dark places, and we're looking forward to letting you listen in.
The first 6 episodes of the Youngblood Monday Lunch were on the theme of science and put together under the auspices of the EST Sloan Project. That's a partnership between Ensemble Studio Theater and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to present new plays about science and technology. The EST Sloan Project celebrates science and progress, but it's important to acknowledge that many discoveries in this country have been made with the unacknowledged, unpaid labor and the suffering of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. We honor their sacrifices and contributions to the progress of science and to the theater we create to celebrate it.
We also want to acknowledge that EST and all of New York City are located on Lenape-Hoking, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenape people and acknowledge the indigenous peoples who live, work, create, and contribute to communities here in Lenape-Hoking. A great resource for finding out more about the Lenape people here in Lenape-Hoking is the website of the Lenape Center at thelenapecenter.com. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy this Q&A with the authors of the Youngblood Monday Lunch. Welcome, everybody, to some form of the Ensemble Studio Theater. We're so glad to have you, and so glad to have you joining us today for a Q&A with the playwrights of the first 6 episodes of the Youngblood Monday Lunch, our new short play podcast. Today was the debut of the 5th episode.
5th episode,
by Michael
yes.
Feldman. Otter Delight, working title. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out. And playwrights, I'm going to have you all go around and introduce yourselves. I think we've met almost everybody, but I'm RJ and Graham's over there.
Hello.
We run Youngblood here at EST, and I'll introduce the players. I have them introduce themselves and say which play they wrote, and I'll just go in order in my Zoom window here. So first is Mona.
Hi, I'm Mona, and I wrote The World is Full of,
which was our episode number 1, and that was also the sneak preview episode that folks who had supported through the year got to take a listen to. Next in my Zoom window is AJ Klaus.
Hi, everyone. I'm AJ, and I wrote Eden Whiskey.
Next in my window is Karina.
Hey, everyone. I wrote She Comes from the Dirt.
And next up is Jake.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jake. I wrote Endogamy.
And the playwright who just launched today, we have Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael. I wrote Otter Delight, working title.
There's the 6th writer of this series of podcasts, which were all themed around science in collaboration with the EST Sloan Project. That's Dylan Guerra. He was not able to attend this evening, but if we have time for it, we have he and Graeme did a preview Q&A today, and we have a little recording of one of Dylan's answers that we can share with you.
Wow, Ken Mandela is going in on the chat right away.
The chat immediately got the question, Youngblood writers, who do you like better, RJ or Graeme?
Oh, goodness.
That's
That's devilish.
He's been-
That's devilish. That's
He's
not a
been
nice
waiting
thing
for
to
a
ask.
public forum to get that out there.
Yeah, and if anybody is listening to this later in podcast form, you are missing the look of complete delight on Ken Mandel's face for having lobbed that grenade into the Q&A. Writers, you don't have to answer that.
Don't answer that. Don't answer that.
We all know the answer to that. So we'll start with a question for everybody to answer in whatever order you feel like, which is just to say when you we've done for many years the Youngblood Sunday Brunch, where we have a theme and people write short plays around that theme, and then we do them live. But when you and it was because that wasn't possible over the last year of lockdown that we conceived sort of the podcast episode to continue letting our member playwrights write short plays and get them with actors and a director and get to hear them in realized form. But as you looked to writing a podcast episode play, what was in your mind about it? What was different? What kinds of inspiration were you open to that you would have been? What was different about writing for podcast than for production on stage?
I can start. So I went to some whiskey distilleries with my father over holiday, and this was due the first week of January. So that was the first sort of, I think I'm going to write about whiskey. And throughout my life, I've been obsessed with recording people on my phones, possibly because in college I would drink a little too much and forget everything that I said the next day. So I was always curious to hear what I sound like when I'm on the moon. And that was the other part of Eden Whiskey that I really loved, this idea of someone who collected audio recordings that sort of played a story specifically for our ears.
I can hop in. I had been using that text-to-speech tool for years. I would, like I say in the podcast, I like it because it's good with rhythm and non-emotive. So I would usually write monologues and have it read it back to me. And, I had, maybe I can talk about it later, but I had the germ of the idea for the monologue and started writing the monologue. And then, like I always did, I used that tool to read it back to me. And I don't know that I would have kept working with the tool if it wasn't going to be specifically for people to listen. And then there was something that sort of congealed beautifully with writing for a podcast, something about having this monologue without a body. So I actually ended up being really excited about the constraints of a podcast.
Just a little background for folks on that episode. We had put out a call to our member writers to say who wants to write a short play about on the theme of science, for the Sloan, but for the podcast. And the first reply of a script that we got for that was from Mona, and it was actually an audio file. And in her email, she said, just listen. It doesn't make sense for you to read this. Just listen. And we listened to what was, very, very much like what her episode became. And it was our first encounter with the podcast genre, with the podcast play genre as well. And it was so mind-blowing to immediately go through the looking glass into a whole sort of different way of making theater. That was such a cool experience that's how that ended up being also the preview episode and the one that we launched the series with.
My feedback at the time was holy shit.
Anybody else have thoughts on that question?
I had trouble thinking about how you would hear something, and so immediately when I started writing a completely different play about a phone call, and then when I decided to go back to this idea, I just kind of stuck with the phone call because I was like, I don't have to think about any, like, some outside sounds, but not so much.
Yeah, my play, I knew I was going to write about sort of ancestral baggage, and for me, it actually worked out super well because I feel like I'm often trapped in my head and freed by my body. So when I was writing a character and a situation which was sort of all about neuroses and feeling trapped, it kind of felt exactly right to write within that frame of like, I don't get, to liberate my characters through their bodies. Like, it felt like everyone was very much so in their head. What are the words that I'm going to say? And the sound transitions between that really, I think, and Caroline, I will say, who designed my piece, did a wonderful job of really amplifying the internal life of the characters in those transitions, because it's a different subtext, right? And I learned so much through the process. I think I would do it completely differently if I were to do it again, because the wonderful thing about the format is the ability to kind of play editor, right? Which is something that we don't get to think about in the theater, is to be like, oh, I can cut that word. I can use a different take, right? So sort of that sort of energy, that's kind of hopping into a new territory than the question that was asked.
And
But
Jake, just to follow up, you actually did some rewriting after your first recording session, right?
I did.
You-
Yeah, I did. I realized after listening to it that there were just some major parts that felt, I don't know, it wasn't quite there yet, right? And on stage I would just bring in new pages, but we had recorded it, and I'm like, what am I going to do? And what we were able to do is to re-record listening. My piece involves two separate couples. So we kept the text exactly the same with one couple, and I rewrote everything for the other couple. And we were able to re-record in response to hearing half of the podcast that had already been recorded. So it was just like this, and I know, I'm guessing every playwright in the room is like, loves that moment of getting the chance to really redo something. And we don't get to do that. Sometimes it just exists. And especially with brunches, right? Like, they just happen. And I got to kind of do a 1.5 moment, which I appreciate.
As I was looking over the episodes and sort of knowing how they were generated, I had a specific question for Karina. I was interested to know. I love the jump that you made, just starting with the theme of science to the themes that you're getting at in your play, the sort of traditional medicine versus hard science, hospital-based medicine. Where did that come from? What was sort of the germ of that play for you?
Yeah. So my father was a doctor and my mom went to med school. And it's kind of like a well-known joke that them two, their philosophy on medicine and science were completely contradictory. My mom abandoned medicine to write poetry and to raise us, so that says a lot. And she's very much interested in holistic medicine and using plant-based ingredients, while my father was very like textbook, no, what's in here, this is how you do it, etc. And my brother, he is disabled. He has Crohn's disease. And my mom is his caregiver. So she uses a lot of like plant-based ingredients, plant-based medicine to treat him. So that's very common in my community. I'm Dominican American. And within the Latino community, we have a botanica, which is filled with plant-based ingredients, with these healers who use herbal medicine to heal your ailments. So that I kind of grew up with that in my household and in my neighborhood. And I used to be very much afraid of the botanica, of the healer, because she was so mystical. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to break that down and explore the pros and the cons of these two worlds that are always colliding in my life.
That's great. I love that. I love the character of Trinidad too. I love her staunch defense of her powers.
She's very much real. I have met her 100 times in my life.
Billy had a question from the chat about how are these recorded? These were all rehearsed on Zoom and recorded in each of the actors' houses on a USB mic setup, and each actor recorded themselves and then sent their track to their episode's sound designer, who then layered everything and equalized everything and tried to get them to sound like they were realistically in the same room. and then did all the editing of putting them together. And we kind of, going into it, none of us had ever done that before, and we knew it was theoretically possible. But I will say, the first time we heard one of the ones that had been recorded live, it was like unwrapping a real present to hear that it sounded like people doing theater together.
In hindsight, I wish I had taken some photos of some of the stuff the women in Eden Whiskey had to do on Zoom while they were mimicking like what it would sound like to speak into each other's necks when they're hugging each other. And they had like jackets up against their faces, or like all the just like really ingenious creative things they came up with my director and sound designer. Was so fun to watch.
Oh, to Carol's question from the chat is great, and this will be something to get, even though we don't have the directors here, but it'd be great to get the playwrights view from the playwright seat. How is it different to direct these versus live theater? What did you see that was different in the process?
There's definitely more similarities than differences, but I can say that we really honed into like the beat work and doing the table work, because you can't really rely on the physicality of things anymore, of the actor, of like, oh, you looked at me this way, like how can we translate that into a beat or a shift in your tone, etc. So that was really fascinating, and also really luxurious for the playwrights. Like, yeah, we're gonna go to the word.
Yeah, it's funny. It felt very similar while in the Zoom in the Zoom room, and but then afterwards, poor Colette Robert, who directed mine, because I could edit it, so I could literally like text her like every 30 minutes for like a week, being like, maybe we should cut out this little phrase or this little word. And so for her, I felt like it became telling Michael it's okay. And people are not going to listen to it 50 times, only one. So
you don't know. People might listen to it 50 times. You don't sell that short. It's an audio classic.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael had a couple emails to us going, can I send a couple more notes? We're like, yes. All right, one more email with notes, Michael, and then you got to let it go. He's like, I know, I can.
That's true, though. That was a part of this process that was like, once the actors wrapped, the part two that I rarely experience is the post work that was an invitation to be so meticulous, where my meticulousness in live theater is me walking behind the audience, sort of just like vibrating and shaking the whole time, being like, oh my God, it's happening. Whereas this time we got to actually use that energy to do all of those notes. That felt really cool.
Yeah, I directed mine, and it was an unusual experience for a couple of reasons. I had never worked with a robot before. But I liked the amount of control that I had. Obviously, I mean, I worked with Microsoft David like I would any other actor, and I have directed my work before. And obviously, there's no giving Microsoft David a note about, intention or the emotion behind the line. But I had ultimate control with rhythm, and rhythm is really important to me. I will iterate a sentence over and over and over again. And I sometimes have to curb this impulse I have to tell an actor to do it exactly the way I want. So I'm a little worried I'm only going to want to work with Microsoft Dave, and it's like me and Microsoft Dave rep company for the rest of my life, because I would just delete. It was all about punctuation, deleting periods, adding commas, adding dashes, whatever it was to get the right rhythm. And it was funny when I sent Graeme the other day a transcript of it, because they're going to share for those who have, unable to hear the podcasts. I had to go in and clean that thing up because it looks at times very bizarre on the page, the way that the text is formatted. So, I had kind of a unique directing experience, but a lot of fun with it.
Honestly, though, I would love to see it in its raw format to see what it took you punctuation-wise to get Dave to meet you there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Dave doesn't, so with all of those silences, they're just commas, the text is really dense at first, the part about the eels, there's like no periods in between. And then towards the end with those pauses, if I wrote pause, he would say pause, or short pause, long pause, silence. And so I just had like half a page of commas to get the right amount of
Your impression
breath.
of Microsoft Dave is spot on.
We spent a lot of time together.
Having now listened to Mona's episode a couple of times, there are times where the music score nature of it really comes through, and there are times where the line delivery that you get from David is like a riff in music, and I'm like, oh right, this is the part where it goes ha 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 ha, and it's really it gets a little bit stuck in your head. It's really distinctive. It's very cool. Anybody else with thoughts on that as far as the process?
Just to add, not as much. I didn't have quite as much control as Mona had over Microsoft Dave, but just the ability to overlap lines, and decide when an actor's line is interrupted, cutting a word or two there, like here or there. I mean, just to be able to do that, and then working with Caroline, working with an editor who could say, here are all of the takes, here are 5 different ways that it could sound. It gave me such a better idea of, as it was such a gift as a writer, of like understanding like, oh, I can be clearer in my text on these things as to how I actually hear them. Like I can use the information that I'm learning with this, to be a little bit more like, no, I know what I want and it's not in the play, because we have 5 different versions and there's one that I know is the answer, right? So it was actually a very clarifying process for me to be like, okay, I can be more specific in my plays as to what I hear.
One of the questions that was submitted in advance was the notion, which is sort of a question for me and Graeme, of do we intend for these to continue even once we're able to work in person? And the plan is for that, for that to continue, and not necessarily every single month or every week, but it really added an interesting dimension. And it added a dimension of who we were able to reach. It broke down a lot of sort of geographical barriers. Karina, I know you had shared a thing on your social media about folks who were able to engage with that. Is that something you want to share with folks?
Sure. So my uncle Julio, who's in Far Rockaway, Queens, he's he migrated over here from the Dominican Republic in the 1980s. And he always knew I was a writer and in theater, but he doesn't know entirely what that means to be a playwright and that playwrights still exist. And he hasn't really seen a play. He kind of approves what I do. He's a nurse, he's a medicine man, he's a scientist. And he had shared on social media, he's like, wow, this was beautiful. I felt like I was in my pueblo. I felt like I was in my town. And, he's been going on and on with my mom about that. And I just thought that, it's really great to have these podcasts for folks who can't make it to Manhattan, whether they have a disability or they're working or et cetera. So I just think that's great.
That's the thing that we're able to do with this. It really makes it seem worth, and it also as we talked about with talking with writers about how they said about writing a podcast, it's slightly different muscles, right? It's a little bit different than writing for the live experience, and for folks in sort of the early years of their career, that's a different kind of workout for the narrative. Oh geez, so we'll come to David's morbid question in a moment, but first I want to circle back and get Harrison's wonderful question, which is whether Michael's opinion of otters has changed through the research for this play.
Just to say, Harrison and I stayed at like Juilliard one summer in high school. It wasn't like actual Juilliard, but we stayed there, and I haven't seen him in 15 years. And I was like looking over, I was like, I know that person, and then realized who it was. Which is not the first time this has happened at EST because of this program. Lily Riopol also directed one of my pieces. I hadn't seen her since I did that same program. So it's a small world. Anyways, otters. Otters are I think I just like humans more since writing this play. because I think you realize that the behaviors of animals are so very much the result of human behavior. You know, they hunt the otters, they move them around, and did all these things that have made conditions for otters very harsh, including they're like being less female otters and more male otters, which makes them more aggressive. And I think that that kind of has made me think a lot more of that cycle. And but not just like, I mean, they're still pretty cute. If you just Google like otters holding hands, it's hard to not like kind of still want to cuddle with them, even though you know they're like murderers. But you know, we are too. There's some good otters, there's some bad otters, there's some good humans, there's some bad.
Michael, this might be an opportune moment, Michael, for us to ask your play. Your work on otter-based theater has taken a real journey, because you started with an idea for a piece called Otter Dismay, and you've arrived at Otter Delight. So I know there were a lot of other otter puns you considered. Would you care to share a few of them with our audience?
Yeah, just so for one little piece of background is that the first year I was in Youngblood, we were told, you know, you research science, you can write these science plays. I was like, cool. So I searched science. And the first article I read was about like flashback to otters being relocated in like 1936. And I was like, oh my God, they're Jews. Like they're being relocated and like all this stuff. And so I had in my head, like these two otters, like trying to find their way home, like two old Jewish men, like eating egg salad sandwiches, like trying to get home. But they would be like shrimp salad sandwiches, because that's what otters eat. And anyway, it's called Otter Dismay. The title of this was actually Otter Dismay up to like 2 weeks ago, and when I realized it kind of gave away the punchline. But I do have a list of other otter. Wait, I have them somewhere here. All right, so here's other otter puns that were alternative titles. I have Otter Dismay, Otter Confusion, Otter Chaos, Otter Disappointment, In Otter News, The Otter One, Significant Otter, Seeing Otter People, Waiting for the Otter Shoe to Drop, Step Otter, Man Otter, In the Second Degree, The Mad Otter, The Shoe is on the Otter Foot, Getting to the Heart of the Otter, Harry Otter in the Penguin Stone, Harry Otter in the Chamber of Kelp, Otter in the Prisoner of Fishermen, Harry Otter in the Half-Seal Prince, Harry Otter in the Goblet of Shellfish, Harry Otter in the Deathly Oil Spill, Like a Lamb Being Led to the Otter, and Otter House 5.
For those listening along at home, there was just a resounding ovation in everyone's webcam for Michael's symphonette of otter puns. That was fantastic. Let's go back to David's morbid question from the chat. Was there a point in the last year where you were like, what if theater doesn't come back? What am I going to do now? Yeah, I speaking just for myself, I think there's nothing like literally not being able to do theater to give you an enforced examination of theater and a life in it. For the writers, does anybody have thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there's the very obvious answer to this, and that it was horrific. It's been horrific, and that question is one that haunts all of us. But I also do think, particularly within the context of, you know, shouting out like to Mona's piece, right? In the context of this moment, a lot of innovation has come up, and more specifically, like, I don't know, I have noticed this in myself, and I've also seen in other writers, this sort of entrance of this question of like, okay, so if I can't do the thing that I thought that I was doing, what can I do? And more so like, what am I called to do? I think I've had a big moment in that regard. Like, you know, can I put down this form and what I think people want to watch, because they're not going to be able to do that anyway. And like, what do I actually want to write, and what formats do I want to play with? What sort of impossible things do I want to try to come up with? You know, I wrote a play this year that I don't even think I want to share with the world, right? And before this year, I was very much in the mindset of like, what can I do for this moment? What's hot, you know? being like coming back to sort of like the creative impulse as a gift to others and to oneself has been sort of the positive amongst a sea of negatives in this time.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to have an optimistic and uplifting and upward looking take on it. Anybody else have thoughts on the existential question of the future of theater?
I think just by sort of like creative impulse, there was a lot of experimenting with form, like Jake was saying. And, you know, Youngbloods we meet every week. And typically someone is sharing a piece of a draft of their play every Wednesday night. And we hit this lull. And then after the lull, there was a lot of shared work that was not necessarily plays, that were plays that would not be performed in this sort of manner. There were essays. And so it was really great, I think, for all of us to sort of just like tap on some of these walls and realize that wall can actually go down right now. And there's a whole room behind that room of things containers that I can write stories in.
Yeah, that's a great point. The transformation of the Youngblood meetings and sharing pages. We had one of our members, Julia Speck, wrote a piece that included what would have been stage directions, but they were about make yourself a tea, get a pillow, be comfortable, recline, listen to this. And it was reaching out from the written text into the experience of hearing it and into the experience of being an audience for it, that just wouldn't be possible just in a theater space, and was only allowed by that sort of breaking of the barriers.
We were talking about doing podcasts for most of quarantine. Like we had the idea came up at a Youngblood meeting pretty early, and like everyone, we struggled to generate material, like just to find it. I think the writers, everyone had to find it in themselves to create. During, so early on, one of the things that happened was that Jake and Nadia Leonhard Hooper composed the theme song for the lunch, excuse me. And just in terms of the bleak moment that David's referring to of like, when is it ever going to come back? I don't want to embarrass Jake, but I would listen to that song because when I would like listen, I would play it for myself. I would play it for RJ. I would play it at staff meetings. It'd just be like, this is like a lighthouse, because it was this. It just the sound of it just to me embodied so much of the joy I feel, and I think a lot of us feel when we're gathered here at EST or gathered together in any way to create a play, so or to hear one or to see one, and that was really just a wonderful kind of flashlight pointing the way. And then when we got Mona's play, and then we got Karina's play, and Michael's and AJ's and Jake's and Dylan's, like the rising tide of feeling like, holy shit, these are great. You just really felt my spirit rise over the weeks that we got to work on these. So it had its existential moment for sure, an extended existential moment, but it definitely led somewhere good.
Carol has a question in the chat. How was meeting on Zoom different from meeting in person? It's less far west than coming to EST. It is a shorter commute. But for the writers, like whether if you did or didn't share work in the Zoom format or just participating in the sharing, what has jumped out at you about that?
I would say the biggest difference is like after the reading. So like when you're in a Youngblood meeting, like afterwards, like I have the group of people that I go we all are on the C train. So we walk to the C train, or we go get a drink afterwards. They'll be like, they'll see my stress and say, let's get a drink. You just heard your play, and we'll talk about it. And in this situation, I went downstairs to my mom and dad, after I heard my play, and I had like no one to talk to about it. So I'd say to me that like even the like not even if it's not about talking about your play, just like those general like being able to catch ups that you lose in those like moments that you're with people felt lost in that. But yeah, but the feedback is always is as insightful as ever and helpful.
There is a tradition in Youngblood feedback of the bar note. There are things that you'll find yourself starting to say in the circle, and then just go, never mind, that's a bar note, and then you just talk about it later in a more casual setting. So yeah, we've lost those. Anybody else?
I just think it's harder to be myself, to be vulnerable on Zoom. The things I want to say sometimes to people, if their story has reached me or not, when it comes out, it's different in person. I think, and right now I'm thinking of this one night where Mona shared some of her work, and she was able to transcend Zoom in a way that just like allowed us all to be really vulnerable and messy in these boxes. And I'll forever think of that when I can delete Zoom off my computer and never have to worry about this stuff again. But yeah, that's been a big challenge for me, is like not taking up a lot of time. I'm so much more aware of how much I'm talking and how many boxes are just like looking at me, and then the anxiety and pressure and whatever of all of that making my stuff come out very calculated, when really I just want to say like, I'm just vibrating. I loved your work. And yeah.
Yeah, like this moment right now, right after AJ just shares that, and then it's silence, and then we all have to just be like, and now what's the next thing going? You know, it's like we can't even transcend it when we're talking about it, right? I just want to like smash my computer, but I'm not going to do it. Don't worry.
No, that's great. It's, I mean, a year ago, I remember the first meetings that we had on Zoom from Young, and it was all, I'm sure everyone remember back when this was a novelty, right? Of seeing all these faces and figuring out, and now it's just, and then it became a drag, and now it's like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, we're in the thing. Like it is what it is. And everyone has now said, no, you're on mute, a million times, and had it said to them a million times. That'll just be the T-shirt for 2020 and 2021. You're on mute. My mom, I'm forced to admit that this from my mother is not in the form of a question. It's like Jeopardy, but from the chat, I've been enjoying the podcasts mainly as a revisitation of my childhood that included radio plays with lots of sound effects. My sister and brother and I used to make them for ourselves. Other folks with it, even I had a friend in middle school who was big into The Shadow, and so we would sit and listen to, The Shadow episodes and comedy albums and stuff. For the writers, had any of you listened to sort of audio drama forums before, or other podcasts, or what was your experience with sort of listening only as information and narrative delivery?
I would say my biggest challenge was that I actually do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't listen to podcasts for the reasons I go sit in a theater. And so so it was a challenge for me to like hear my podcast, because I'm like, some of these jokes I'm like, this would kill an EST, and I'm like, but I don't really want to listen to it. And so trying to figure that out was a challenge. And I'm sorry, I just saw Mona in my screen. She wrote a brunch play that was about a podcast. That's like one of my favorite short plays I've ever heard. And I was just thinking how, I don't know, I don't have a question there, but I was thinking she loves podcasts too, and we love talking about podcasts. But I think the podcasts we talk about are usually like, we listen to The Daily. I listen to a lot of true crime, which my Otter play doesn't have any of kind of like the things that I love like to hear while I walk. But hearing everyone's, I'm like, oh, this is cooler than I thought. This could be good.
I listen to a lot of science-y podcasts. My favorite is Invisibilia, love Radiolab, and I'll admit I actually don't listen to a lot of plays as podcasts. I have a lot to catch up on because newly, that's been happening this year. But I think I did learn a bit from the podcast that I listened to, and I wanted to recreate that sense of call and response and surprises. And, you know, I've depended a lot on podcasts to get me through hard days, you know, especially Invisibilia. Those episodes are just extraordinary. Just the most exciting things that you didn't know about the second before you pressed play. And then you press play. And that's a big theme of what my play was about, was going, I've been surprised before, I'll be surprised again. I promise myself I will. And when I forget that, one way to get out of that feeling and to remember that there are surprises, more good surprises, is listening to, you know, listening to podcasts.
From the chat, I just want to share Nina and or Simon's comment that agree with Stephanie. Audio is a new stage for your productions, lots of potential audiences, but how do you make money from podcasts? Hope to hear more even after the pandemic. Yeah, it's for sure been an experiment in just putting things out. And Graeme, what is the list of countries that people have listened to the Youngblood Monday Lunch?
I think we've reached people in Spain and Germany and Belgium. We're big in Belgium. Canada is significant. Yeah, we're getting all over.
So it's for sure interesting to do this and do these processes. And then the opening night is that the final recorded file has gone to Jack Blau and Mariel Sanchez in the production office, and they've uploaded it to our Libsyn and scheduled it to launch Monday at 12. And then we get an email saying locked and loaded, and we're like, oh, that's opening. And then and then I look at my Apple Podcasts, and at the top of my library there's the beautiful Harrison's beautiful image of the lunch bag and the apple, and I'm like, oh, there's a new episode. But it's great. We've heard back from some folks. We've gotten, it's so wonderful to see everybody here, and we've gotten some emails from friends and colleagues saying, I listened to it, I love it, I heard it. And those little surprise hits of feedback when you've just sort of put something out into the ether is really a delight. And Lisa in the chat says the first time she heard of Mice and Men was on radio, one of the most exciting things she's ever experienced. Yeah, there's something very intimate, especially if you're listening on headphones, of having, if you have sort of ear pods in, I mean, you can listen to it on a speaker as well, but getting the story right here is really, really interesting. Graeme, did you want to share your Q&A with Dylan?
We did talk a little bit about his play Signaling. Without trying to give too much away, it traces the 40-year history of the Arecibo telescope, which is sort of an unsung telescope. It sort of lived its life in the shadow of the greater known Hubble telescope. And the play actually traces the arc of the relationship between the Arecibo telescope and the Hubble telescope. So I have a little recording. It's a couple of minutes of Dylan talking about his play.
This play kind of came out of, I missed the Sloan deadline last year, and I really was mad about it. and I knew I wanted to write something, but I didn't know what, because I was in sort of a writing hole. And then I started to see a parallel between, and I think this has been a common thing as the rise of specifically space kind of sci-fi has become popular again. There was something for me about isolation during the last year, and my own writing, I guess, or what am I trying to say? There was something I was interested in about, I was trying to express feelings of deep loneliness and isolation in a play without it being very overtly about people locked in a room in a pandemic. And for me, that translated to a satellite that's stuck on the ground, and a satellite that is only so far away from Earth, and so two passing ships in the night that could never meet. And sort of the innate sort of sadness in that, and the forging of relationships through that. and then that was sort of why I decided to use robot, for lack of a better term, like robots instead of actual human actors, as I wanted a vocal quality in the play that also felt separated from humanity. Because I think really, I mean, it's a love story, but I think really it's like my own my own existential crisis of like, what does it actually mean to be a person post pandemic, which we're like still in, but you know, seeing there's a light at the end of the tunnel in a way more tangible way than there was just months ago. But so a lot of the play for me is not necessarily about the pandemic, but about those isolated feelings. And it was a weird way that I was like, oh, I enjoy in this time, I enjoy writing for like the audio medium, because if like the thing that I'm currently after is exploring these ideas of loneliness, not having a physical body in space or like a Zoom figure, and instead it just being the sort of like tinny robotic voice that you have to listen to in order to like piece together a story, was like interesting to me. And that's also been something that I've like seen. I feel like a lot of the podcasts so far have had these like underlying themes of just loneliness, and not like in the sad sort of loneliness way, but loneliness in the sense of like a deep like search, an unending search for something. That's sort of what I would consider lonely. Is that okay? Is that an answer?
For me, the loneliness that what we were talking about earlier, I think there was a question that was thrown out there around like, how do you imagine people to be absorbing the thing that you made, right? And there's this exquisite loneliness of like putting something out there and just not understanding how it's landing in people, which is the gift of theater, right? Is that we trap people. They can't look at their phones because people would give them dirty looks. They have to experience it, right? Which is like an amazing thing in our world today, like that we still have. And that's my theory as to why theater still exists. But I also find it to be exciting to imagine, the way that I listen to podcasts. Like I listen often to things on double speed because I get distracted otherwise. But then I listen to a podcast on double speed, and it started with my own voice, like singing our theme song as like a chipmunk. And, like all of that world, and making food. And I find that also to be exciting, with like not quite knowing how people are absorbing it, that they might have absorbed it while doing other things or in other situations. And that it makes me think about, both the loneliness and just the aloneness of the way that we're absorbing things these days.
The question that Jake was referring back to in the chat was Larissa Lurie's. I don't know if people saw it, but just asking, when you listen to a radio play, do you sit and listen to it on its own? Do you listen while you're doing other things? And how do you imagine other people listening to your plays? And Jake gave a great answer, but I wonder if anybody else has a scene that they imagine or that pops up from time to time.
I mean, gosh, not to name names, but there's a certain podcast I listen to and I can't sleep at night that I know will like put me to sleep. There's a podcast I listen to that's like, this is perfect for a cup of coffee. This is a podcast I always love to listen to when I'm walking my dog. So I have such a like huge spectrum of what I use podcasts for that I guess it would be hard to draw a box of mine for someone else.
If any of the participants wanted to drop in the chat how they listened to the Youngblood Monday lunch, it'll be a little audience survey. Were you doing something else? Did you just sit down to listen to it? It'd be great to know. While puzzling, oh, that's really good. That's like the perfect blend of all different parts of your brain while working. Good, glad to help. Oh, dinner theater. Harrison's doing dinner theater. Stephanie's turning off the lights and listening in bliss. Caroline while cooking. That's great. They're only like 20, 30 minutes long, so these are really they're compact. That's great. That's so great to see everybody's lunch during work break. Oh, the lunch. You're actually doing the lunch at lunch.
You did it literally.
There's been extensive discussion around what constitutes a lunch and what's a lunch of the soul versus a logistical, actual practical lunch in the daytime. Graeme, I think there was one more question that had been submitted in advance that we had not.
what are some writing practices that you've learned / started during the pandemic that you hope to continue as live theater opens back up?
I had to really start scheduling writing into my planner. And I think more responsible playwrights do that before the pandemic, but I was not doing that. I really had to like sit down and go Monday through Sunday, all right, 9 a.m. till 12 a.m. I'm gonna write. I think it's made me more disciplined in a really weird way.
That's so admirable.
I found myself experimenting a lot more with form, and I am excited and feel empowered by that and will definitely continue. I think that, last year life became pretty unrecognizable for a few personal reasons. And, when your life becomes unrecognizable, it's hard, but it's also an opportunity to question why you do anything the way that you do it, why you write plays the way that you write them. And I'm writing plays very differently now. And that's one of a few good things that's come out of a very difficult year.
I have things from the year that I want to change. Like I should be reading more. And like just like small things that like no like practice that I shouldn't carry over any of my habits from the pandemic time. But just like getting more disciplined reading as part of the research process, which I haven't done as much, but I just kind of started doing, is actually very helpful.
I think, and this dovetails a little bit with some of the earlier questions. Everyone's talking about looking ahead to when life starts up in person a little bit more, and it made me think that one of the things that has been sort of a stock answer, at least for me, and I don't know for everybody else, about sort of why theater. The why theater stock answer has been you're in a room, right? You're experiencing it in a room together. And that's been sort of the very easy, thoughtless go-to sort of, oh, well, what makes it special is that you're all in a room together and you're experiencing it all at the same time. And we've all had an enforced year plus away from that. And when it returns, I think one way or another, we're going to be feeling that in a much more essential and vital way than we've, it won't be a complacent knee-jerk answer anymore. Being in a room with people will really feel like something in a way that we took for granted before. And that's something we're really looking forward to, and looking forward to being able to share in the group and with the writers and in the theater making process, and with all of you folks who are so kind and wonderful to join us this evening. I think we are going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for coming. It's wonderful to see everyone's faces. Thank you for your support over this incredibly difficult season, and for being a part of it, and for being so invested that you were eager to bring yourself here and listen to people talk about it. It's really touching and moving, and we could not be happier and more grateful.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks again.
Thanks again to the Playwrights of Youngblood for taking part in the Q&A. That's Mona Pirnot, AJ Klaus, Karina Billini, Jake Brasch, Michael Feldman, and Dylan Guerra. Thanks also to the supporters of the Ensemble Studio Theater who hopped on a Zoom with us and had such thoughtful questions and enthusiastic support for the writers in the podcast. It was wonderful to spend time with everybody.
The staff of the Ensemble Studio Theater are Artistic Director Billy Carden, Executive Director Susan Vitucci, Associate Artistic Director, Co-Director of Youngblood, and Program Director of the EST Sloan, Graeme Gillis, over there in the corner. Director of Play Development, Associate Director of EST Sloan, Lindsay Furman. Co-Artistic Director of Youngblood, RJ Tolan. That's me, right here, by the microphone. General Manager, Liz Uckman. Production Manager, Jack Plow. Brand Marketing Manager, Harrison Densmore. Communications and Audience Services Manager, Samantha Sembler. Finance Director, Jonathan Suarez. Literary Associate, Nikamay Anderson. Production and Operations Producing Apprentice, Mariel Sanchez. Development Assistant, Joey Nasta. And Facilities Manager, Jose Sanchez. The Youngblood Monday Lunch theme song was written by Youngblood's own Jake Brasch and Nadia Leonhard Hooper, and incidental music by Jake Brasch. The podcast sound engineer and the sound designer of today's episode was Caroline Eng.
The Ensemble Studio Theater encourages all our audiences to support Black Girls Do STEM. That's a nonprofit organization that envisions a future with equitable representation for Black women in all of the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Their mission is to inspire curiosity among Black girls in all communities through education, access, and opportunity. You can find them at bgdstem.com. Please support their important work and a more equitable future. We also want to encourage everyone to take whatever action they can against violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. A website you can go to support that movement is stopaapihate.org/actnow.
Thank you for tuning in to this special Q&A episode. We're going to take a couple weeks to put together the next couple episodes. Look for those starting Mondays in the beginning of June. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Be well.